Hey everyone, James Azar here with CyberHub Engage. We have a very special episode. It is October. It's Cyber Security Awareness Month. Apparently, we need a whole month for it, not an entire year. And of all months, it's October month, competing with breast cancer awareness, competing with a lot of other things. So we've decided to take a road trip to Augusta. And those who listen to the show know we're based out of Georgia, but Augusta's kind of the new cybersecurity capital of the country. And people just don't know it. When you think of Augusta, you think of the Masters, which is, by the way, a great golf tournament.
That's right.
It's a great time to be in the city. But I have with me, do you go by Steven or Steve?
Steve.
Steve Foster, who's the special agent in charge for the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. And you really developed and managed the cyber unit for the GBI.
Yes.
And you guys are based here in the Georgia Cyber Center.
We are.
So, you know, it's interesting to think that the GBI, which a lot of it is based in Atlanta, is it right? All of a sudden, the cyber unit's out in Augusta. What's that like?
Absolutely. It's presents some unique challenges. One of those is the logistical challenges of being in Augusta. Uh-huh. The hub of Georgia, the population of Georgia is Atlanta. So Augusta is a little different, but there are tremendous benefits to being in Augusta beyond the Masters, and I think that you can actually see this around the area. The collaborative effort here, I think, is the number one reason that we're here, and the ability for the GBI as a law enforcement partner to be part of the pie, a slice of the pie, in the Georgia Cyber Center, I think is tremendous. So we have less traffic, we have a better view than we would if we were in Atlanta, and I think the overall partnership that we have here is tremendous. So being in Augusta, while it does have some challenges, is very, very beneficial.
You know, it's really interesting because first time I saw you was at a panel here where you were talking about your ability in this facility to be able to network and team up and solve problems that maybe wouldn't be so easily accessible working in kind of, I don't want to call it the bureaucracy of Atlanta, but the challenges of being just in a building full of people who are GBI.
Right.
Here you're in a building with a university, private enterprise, public enterprise. How is that attributed to some of the work you guys do here? And what kind of challenges has it presented?
I think that one of the things, and first, if you understand how we were developed, we were basically created out of a unit called the Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit in Atlanta. The computer crimes side of that became a larger picture, and their focus needed to be on the child exploitation. So we were born out of that to handle the umbrella of cybercrime in Georgia. So when you look at law enforcement in particular, I've been in law enforcement in Georgia for 30 years. Law enforcement works inside their own bubble. There's a degree of secrecy in the investigations, and we operate in that bubble. What we have in Augusta is the ability to reach beyond that bubble. So, you know, not only is it conceptualized, you actually are located right here where you have the opportunity to speak with business and academia and the intelligence and federal government communities. And I think that brings us out of the law enforcement bubble to be able to solve the problems that are so tremendous when you think about cybersecurity and, in our perspective, cybercrime. So that's it, is being in Augusta in this environment kind of bursts that law enforcement bubble so that we can accomplish those things that normally would be much more difficult to solve.
It's interesting to hear that because so often when you think of, I don't want to say the Georgia bubble, but like you said, the law enforcement bubble. In cybercrime, that bubble is really kind of challenging because law enforcement can't always do it on its own. You need the victims to report the crime.
Right.
And some people in cybercrime, it's eerily amazing how many people don't really report this.
Absolutely.
And I don't know why, right? Because you guys aren't a regulator.
Right.
You're not going to find them. You're not looking to blame people. So why do you think there's that stigma of not reporting being a victim of a cybercrime?
I think there are several reasons. And if you go back and look at an important tool, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3.gov,
right.
and you look over the history of reporting to that, you find that the number of victims who report over the years hasn't changed a lot. So from the past 20 years or so that IC3.gov has actually been in business, annually you only have roughly 300,000 reports every year. When the dollar amounts increase exponentially, the number of victims reporting stays fairly stable. There are several reasons. One is the traditional law enforcement model is if you're, as an individual or a business, you're a victim of a cybercrime and you report that to your local law enforcement agency, the standard answer is there's nothing we can do.
Right.
The perpetrator, unlike almost every other crime, is almost never in the same place as the victim at the same time, if ever. So you have that separation. Does law enforcement put resources toward investigating crimes that even if we solve them, the perpetrator may never be brought to justice? There may never be, you never get your losses back. So you have law enforcement that has that. They would rather spend their resources addressing local crime. So you're told, no, we can't help. Other issues are, especially in cases of elder abuse type cases, where I don't know if people are aware, but age 60 and older are the number one loss category for cybercrime. That's the one that is attracted the most because they are an easy target and they're easily taken advantage of. When that happens, you have a group of people who don't want their children to know. They don't want to lose their independence. They don't want to be embarrassed by this. And basically they want to keep secret that they've been taken advantage of. So you have that component. We also have the challenge of businesses not wanting to report these type of crimes because it's a branding issue. One of the things, especially on the state level, is if you're a business and you report to us that you have been victimized, then a report's generated. And under open records laws, that report is accessible to the news media. As a business, you immediately lose your ability to control your message, and it impacts your brand. So you have that. So there's a tremendous problem on the underreporting, unreporting, and misreporting of these types of crimes, and there's several reasons for that. One of the things that we want to do here, and basically through public education, is to let people know that you can report these, and that there is a resource now that can get involved in the investigation of these cases, and hopefully can bring some to justice, at least get closure in some of these cases. But that takes time.
Well, and you brought up a really interesting point, which is most of the time when you're a victim of a cybercrime, you don't think of calling the GBI or FBI.
Right.
You call 911, and then the operator tells you this isn't an emergency, call your local non-emergency number.
Right. Yep.
And then they pretty much tell you there's nothing you can do.
Sure.
And they say, well, you can report it to the GBI or FBI, but how likely are you to do that?
Right. And other problems in that is the structure of the GBI is still such that we have to be called by that local police department or sheriff's department. So an individual that's a victim of a cybercrime can't call us directly and ask for help. They have to still report that to local law enforcement, and they have to be the one that calls for us to become involved.
Do you feel like that's something that needs to change?
Yes.
Is it going to change?
We are hoping that it will. We at the Cybercrime Center have asked for that change previously. We will ask for it again in the upcoming session of the legislature. We'll see. I think that it's an important area of jurisdiction that we take on. So I hope that we can. The only issue with that is and this is not isolated to the GBI, we have limited resources.
Right.
So obviously we can't take every report of an attempt, every report of a theft, and be able to properly investigate every crime. So even if we're given original jurisdiction in those matters, we still have to have the ability to vet cases and for lack of a better term, but pick and choose which cases we will be able to investigate.
So as a taxpayer in the state of Georgia, I'd rather call you if I'm a victim than go to my local police department. Because when I know there's nothing I can do, and now based on what you're telling me, which I didn't know, which is news for me, is they would have to escalate it to you. So then I'm relying on them escalating a case, which they may or may not escalate, just depending on how motivated the person taking the report really is.
Sure.
for this.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you know this. In Georgia, there are 159 counties. So you
Right.
have 159 sheriff's departments. You have, I think there are over 1,000 police departments around
Correct.
the state. So you have a variety and a range of different abilities and different resources. So if you lived in Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Fulton County, they may have the resources that if you report it locally, they can investigate that for you. Whether you'll get resolution is another matter, but they may be able to take the investigation. On the other end of the spectrum, the small counties that don't have the resources, that's where the need is. That's where the escalation needs to come from, and in a lot of cases, it doesn't come from there.
And that's where most elderly are targeted, right? I mean, it was the IRS scam early on, and that was a cyber scam.
Sure.
They were, I mean, I still get those calls.
Right.
I love it when they call me. I'll sit on the phone with them for an hour and a half.
Sure.
Because it's someone else they're not stealing from for that period of time.
Right. Exactly. And every day is a different scam, and everyone is a target. But you're absolutely right. And when you are a victim, when you do have that loss, the feeling of helplessness has to be incredible. Either the fear of reaching out or reaching out and seeing nothing happen.
Well, and being afraid of getting in trouble.
Sure.
I mean, I think a lot of times I've seen it in cases where, I was brought on for sextortion cases, which are now picking up a ton of steam. And, those people, they don't know how to deal with it.
Sure.
They're completely at a loss. I mean, it's embarrassing.
Right.
Some of them, are married, they have children. Some of them, they're in their older age. It's terrible, but they can also report those,
Right.
correct?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, I always say, go to the FBI, but.
Well, and one of the issues with that is go to the FBI. The FBI has limited resources as well. If you go back and you do look at the numbers, particularly, which is where we draw them from IC3, you see that the for-profit cybercrime has increased so much over the past few years that the thresholds that the federal government can investigate have grown because the resources have not. So you have the FBI who is there, but if you are a victim of sextortion or online threats or something of that nature, they don't have the resources to investigate those. There has to be a structure that allows cases that don't reach that threshold to become involved.
So
and I think that's where we see ourselves stepping into that void.
So I have a theory that law enforcement needs to be taken into version 3.0.
Yes.
And that is that we don't need so many detectives investigating. We need more small-time cyber units within major police departments like the city of Atlanta or Marietta, where they have the power to actually, take a sextortion case and really investigate it and at least share that information up to the FBI
Right.
and the DOJ, because most of the time that's coming from abroad, and at least then we can send it to, the FBI officers in India or Pakistan or Russia or wherever that's at, and kind
Exactly.
of start to address it at the root cause. And it feels like oftentimes we're just not doing it. Are we not doing it from a budget standpoint, or is it we're not seeing that far ahead because most of our leadership isn't living in our world?
Well, I think that the biggest issue is that law enforcement is reactionary. So we react to crime trends, right? When you look at the child exploitation side, you'll see that there is that structure in place. It's through the organization of ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. So you have a federally structured task force that reaches all the way down to local affiliates. They receive the same training, the same equipment, task force funding, and they do work together. They generate cases downward and they return information upward. So there is that structure in place. What we need on the rest of cybercrime is that exact same structure to be put in place, but for everything else. And I think that's what we lack. But I believe that it's because we're reactive. And I think that it's only now that the problem has become so tremendous that we're seeing the need to involve that type of a structure. We're not ignoring it. I don't think, budgets are always a factor, but you can't ignore a problem that has gotten this large.
Well, I saw Frank Abagnale Jr., who's an FBI agent. I think you know who he is. He's the guy from the movie Catch Me If You Can is based on him, and now he works for the FBI Cybercrime unit. He went from check fraud in the 60s now to cybercrime.
Sure.
And I met him and was able to speak with him in Alabama at a cyber event there. And he was a keynote speaker at that event. And an amazing person, makes everyone feel like they're worth $1 million by sitting with them. But he brought up a few very, very interesting points. One of which was, he goes, we're witnessing the largest transfer of wealth in human history through cybercrime.
Sure.
That no one's really talking about.
Yeah.
And the second thing he talked about was the fact that people are taking advantage of loyalty and people's ability to want to help. Cyber criminals are taking advantage of loyalty and people's ability to want to help to really create a massive scale and a massive amount of fraud.
Right.
And that's not really being talked about. You don't really see it on 60 Minutes.
Right.
You don't see it on Dateline. It used to be that this is how people were aware of an epidemic. And it seems like this epidemic is just not being covered.
Sure.
How does the GBI start to help companies that go through a business email compromise situation or you know the different kinds of cyber frauds that they go through? I mean, when should people call on you? What should they call you? Kind of, they can't really directly call you, but how do you guys help?
The process, and first, he's exactly right. And I think one of the problems with that is smoke doesn't rise from cyber attacks, right? Physical attacks, you know, you think of the impact that September 11th had on people. You can see the damage that's done.
Right.
On cyber attacks, you have to only imagine, and most of us can't even imagine how this damage is done. We talk about numbers and we talk about technology, and it's not something that we can visualize. So I think that he's absolutely right when you talk about that. It's hard to have the discussion because there's no shock and awe behind cybercrime, and there should be. You know, when you talk about the losses, the transfer of wealth, in Georgia alone last year, we saw almost $500 million leave businesses and individuals' pockets. That's $500 million that should be going into commerce in Georgia that is being sent across the globe and leaving the U.S. So it is. He's absolutely right. There's a tremendous transfer of wealth. The most important thing, especially for businesses that are involved in these business email compromises, is we will let you control your message. If you know, you can't be afraid to report these cases because of a branding issue. We'll let you be the one that runs the messaging. There are regulatory issues behind a lot of companies that they have to report in certain circumstances, but we're not going to take over the message for you. We're going to work with you. The earlier you report, the better. There are still techniques and methods that allow us to locate the funds that have been taken and to a large degree freeze those funds and have some, if not all, returned to you. But it has to happen quickly. Time is always of the essence. But in those
what
cases,
is it? 72 hours? 48 hours?
It's really not a hard and fast number. But really, it is the sooner the better. You know, you know the TV show The First 48.
Uh-huh.
It gives 48 hours this magical number.
Right, to solve a homicide. And
Absolutely.
if you don't.
But your best chance at solving the homicide is at the moment of the homicide, right? If a cop was there, he could solve it immediately. And every second that goes by, that chance decreases. Well, the same thing is true here. If I know the funds left my account and went into your account, the moment that they went into your account, if I can freeze it, I've frozen it. As 24 hours goes by, you've had more of an opportunity to move the money into other accounts or into cryptocurrency, move the money around the world, launder it, and the money, the chances for us to get any back is gone. So, you know, absolutely, the sooner the better. One of the issues that you have in cybercrime, however, is that you very rarely recognize that money's been taken from your account as soon as it's been taken. It's usually been going on over a period of time. Business email compromise, just like you were talking about a minute ago, taking advantage of trust, these are done as a scheme. It's intended to make you believe that you're giving your money to a legitimate location. So you may send me a payment that you expected to make. It just went to a different account. I contacted you as the recipient, and I told you I've changed my account information. Here it is. You send the money to that account, and you find out later that that was a criminal's account. Well, they've had plenty of time to move it on. But as soon as you realize and discover that the theft has taken place, that's when the need is there to start the investigation.
So I'm going to put you on the hot spot here for just a second.
I'm always on the hot spot.
Well, I say it like this because I've a lot of friends who are in law enforcement, and I appreciate the work they do. I appreciate the work you do. And when we hear a business email compromise, the typical solution I've seen, and I've actually kind of almost made fun of this because IC3 issued a warning of BEC, and they said, our solution to this is pick up the phone and call. And we live in a world where picking up the phone and calling just isn't always doable.
Right.
We live in a world that's extremely fast.
Right.
The speed that information and data and money flow in is like never before.
Absolutely.
Is that a realistic expectation to solve BEC, pick up the phone and ask a question?
I don't know that it's realistic, but it's the only one we have right now. Cybercrime moves at the speed of light, and we still move at the speed of government. And I think that's one of the challenges going forward that we have to address, is that this is unlike anything else that we do. Homicides, rape, robberies, every other traditional crime. Cybercrime almost needs its own system to be addressed. So, that's the best we can do right now.
Right.
Is let's call it, let's start it, let's get it going. Is that going to be the best? No, it's not. But we're hopefully starting the conversation to head in the direction of what can we do next.
Do you think there's technology to help reduce BEC? Have you seen it? I mean, this center, and we'll get to talk about this center here in a moment, but do you think there's anything out there that can really slow down business email compromise?
Sure. There is, and I think it's constantly under development. I think that, as you know, well over 90% of these business email compromises or all cybercrime starts with email. So I think that the first thing that industry has to do, especially those that are involved in email, is to find the solutions to that. Better filtering, better artificial intelligence to be able to recognize the threats, to be able to compare IP addresses. Where's the email actually coming from as opposed to where it purports to be coming from? So they can do those things on the technology end to be able to reduce or filter out the threats. Training is always important. One of the things that I always find is interesting is that the Better Business Bureau did a poll a few years ago that found that out of all small businesses, less than half actually train their employees to avoid email compromises. And out of all of those that do train their employees, only 75% learn from that training. So even if you train your employees, 25% are still going to click on the link, or they're still going to follow the instructions. But I think that you've reduced 75% of the possibilities. And I think that the combination of that, I think the constant changing of the technology, the reevaluation, and the training on the human side, which is the most vulnerable side of this, in combination, I think is the only way that we can start to shift it. What we'll see is, and you can see it year over year on the trends, is that while the email compromise scheme is not new, it is the number one scheme going right now. It's the best.
It's like $28 billion.
Yeah, and it beats all others 2-1. So I mean, it is where the money is right now. But if you go back 5 years, you'll find that business email compromise cases were third, fourth. They were down the list. They weren't the number one moneymaker for the cyber criminal. Now they are. So through technology and through training of employees, force them to move to something else, and they will. But let's get them off of the emails. Email right now is the number one threat. That human attack surface of an email is where the problem lies.
We're seeing it now with deep fakes too,
Sure.
with voice calls. I mean, there was that company in the UK where the CEO of the German subsidiary, the German mother company, called the CEO of the British subsidiary and had him transfer money to a Hungarian company, and he just did it, and that was all by phone.
Sure.
I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, but it happens every day. I mean, it happens with email every day. Some are very, very low sophistication. The email has to come from no one in particular, but the body of the email just purports to come from someone important, and the change is made. We actually have cases going in Georgia right now that targeted sheriffs and chairmen of county commissions, where their finance department received an email purporting to be from them asking to change their direct deposit for their paycheck. Why they would pick on sheriffs, I don't know, but they did. And sheriffs woke up on payday and found out that their money wasn't in the bank. And that's how we found out about it. So the base...
It's really brazen to go after law enforcement.
Yeah, it is.
It's really brazen.
Sure.
Do you feel like that's nation state? I mean...
No.
Or is it just a bunch of, just an organized crime kind of thing, just kind of the classic Hollywood scenario of the bad guy taunting the good guys?
I think some of it is that, but I think also what they do is that they want to go after the chief. They want to go after the CEO, the president, who's in charge, because your finance department's not going to question an email coming from the boss. The sheriff is the boss. So that's why they're using agency, company heads, department heads, and are doing that, because they're going to be the least to be questioned. And I think that's what they've done. They recognize, look, the internet 30 years ago was based on trust. When it was developed, it was based on, we have to have a system that we trust each other. And we're being exploited in that trust. Email's the same way. We've learned since we began using email 15, 20 years ago, that what I used to be able to trust, the files that you sent me, the links that you sent me, the instructions you sent me, I can't trust that anymore. They've taken advantage of that. So they've taken that trust away from us. The problem is nobody's recognized that they've taken that trust away from us, and they continue to fall for the schemes.
Well, I think people tend to want to trust because that's our nature.
Sure.
Right? I mean, our nature is to trust.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, a lot of times when we try to put people in a zero trust model, which is kind of a buzzword nowadays, we end up in a really kind of, I don't want to say dark world. I think we end up in a really kind of bad place.
Right. There's a couple of things about that. There's an old song that uses the phrase "trust in Allah but tie up your camel," and I think that's the same thing. Trust but verify. That's why we're going to things like multi-factor authentication as a tool to start to defeat these. I'll still trust you, but I'm going to make sure that I can believe you.
Right.
And I don't think that it puts us in a world where everybody thinks that someone's lying to them. Maybe it does. I don't know. But I think that we're at a point now where that's just the practical nature of things. That you can still trust, but just validate, just verify. If you get an unusual request, an unusual email, that's when you have to take a second step and just say, did you send this to me? Was this your instruction? And a few seconds will save hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thousands of dollars. So let's talk a bit about Augusta. You're a native?
I'm not, but I've been here 24 years. So
okay, so that pretty much makes you a native.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the cyber ecosystem here.
It's a I would call it a work in progress, and obviously we opened our doors July 1st of last year, of 2018. So it is a work in progress. There is so much that is happening in Augusta that we've never seen before. The overall growth, and it's fostered out of Fort Gordon. It's fostered out of the NSA. And I think that that's what's causing this to bloom. If it weren't for that being the source of all of this, I don't think GBI Cyber would be here. I think we would be in Atlanta. We would be in the hub of the state. But because of that I think that's the attraction to what's here. Your needs are here, and then your resources are going to move here as well. So you do have this wonderful idea that you and I had been talking about, where we actually do bring private industry, academia, government, federal, state, hopefully bringing in local government as well, all into the same area. And it's at the end of the day, it's to solve problems. It's for us to be able to say, this is what we're seeing. How do you address it? What do you recommend? What's your expertise? and to bring something to their table as well. And I think that's what we're seeing in Augusta that we don't really see anywhere else. One of the things that is good here as well is you don't get it's the old forest for the trees. We are so not isolated, but we are allowed to work in the same space, and this can be the focus.
Right.
Where I think if we were in a large city like Atlanta or somewhere else, then you do kind of bleed out into everything else that's going on.
Like the Israel model of Beersheba. Beersheba is was, now it's not anymore. And I think that's what's going to happen to Augusta. And people don't know that Augusta, literally, like right behind me, South Carolina. Absolutely. We could throw a rock at South Carolina. Yeah. Like, that's South Carolina, Micah.
I know that.
Okay, I'm just making sure, buddy. If you want to leave the state, you can.
That's right.
And this isn't communist Russia. You don't need papers to do this. Thank God. But it's kind of like what happened with Beersheba in Israel. It was a small southern city that had poverty and drugs. And Augusta didn't have this. Augusta's always been a really nice community. But when Prime Minister Netanyahu decided to essentially take all of Israel's cyber and move it to Beersheba, people looked at him and go, why not Tel Aviv? Why not Jerusalem? Why not Haifa? And it's turned out to be the best thing he's ever done. I mean, Ben-Gurion University there is one of the leading research universities in cyber, and I feel like Augusta is getting there.
Sure.
I feel like it's that same model. It's just watching that model develop here, and soon enough this will be what people, when they think of private-public partnership, they're going to think of Augusta. They're not going to think of New York or Atlanta or anywhere else. They're going to think Augusta.
Sure. And I think that it has a lot to do with the focus. You know, Augusta is an existing mid-sized city, but now it has the focus of cybersecurity in Augusta. We've joked here about changing the name from Augusta to Cyber City, Georgia, because that's the focus, and I think that's where the growth will come from.
I want to trademark the welcome to Augusta, the cyber capital of the United States.
Yeah. They already play that at the airport.
Do they?
Absolutely. It is the
we drove
capital.
in, unfortunately, so
Yeah.
I've never flown to Augusta.
Yeah.
So
you should. It's a great airport.
I like small airports.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like small airports.
Yeah.
I used to live in Grand Rapids, and I'd get to the airport like 5 minutes before boarding. You clear TSA pre-check, you're done. You're 5 minutes before boarding, and parking was $2 a day.
Yeah.
$2 a day.
Yep.
I couldn't park for an hour at Atlanta Airport for $2.
Yeah. Yep. And Augusta has a beautiful airport. So you'll be able to fly in and out from Washington, D.C. in the spring. You can fly from here to Dallas every day. It's a great place to be. So
that's awesome.
And that's because of what's going on at Fort Gordon. We wouldn't be flying into Washington, but we are. So the growth is here, and it's specific. It's focused. So maybe we'll go somewhere with Cyber City. We'll see.
Yes. Steve, thanks so much for coming on today. I really do appreciate it. Steve Foster, he's the special agent in charge for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And I'd say you can find him on LinkedIn, but you don't want to. But if you do find him on LinkedIn, they can connect with you and ask you questions, whatever you need. I've heard Steve speak before on multiple panels. He's someone great to be in touch with and kind of engage, even to bring to your organization, right? You can go to organizations and speak to companies.
Absolutely.
And so forth.
We do that on a regular basis, and we get asked on a regular basis. So.
Excellent. So again, Steve Foster with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. We're going to be back with more here just in a few minutes.